Well, today we continue our series titled The Life and the Household of God, again, going through the book of 1 Timothy. And I've said this each week, it's our prayer that all of us would know how to live a life inside the household of God, how to operate, how to function inside the local church, because we serve a God of order, not a God of chaos. And He doesn't want the local church to be chaotic, which sometimes it can be if we're not adhering to God's word. So we want to adhere to His word and listen to what He has to say about how to live inside the local church, inside the household of God. Now, in previous weeks, we've talked about the roles of men and women in the church, more so from the member/attender perspective. Today, we shift a little as we're going to discuss the role of godly leadership in God's household, because every single household needs leadership. The church needs leadership. The household, your households, needs godly leadership. However, the principles of godly leadership applies to everyone inside the local church. Every single person that attends the local church, it applies to everyone, especially when it comes to the issue of accountability. Because as believers, your business is my business, and vice versa for everyone else. Not because we just want to know all the tea, so to speak, but because we want to see you improve in your walk with Jesus Christ. We don't want you to fall into the pit of sin. We want you to lift up your hands, glorifying the Lord, and live a life that is pleasing to Him and Him alone. And if we believe if you do that, you will be righteous and blameless before Him. It's not a works-based salvation, but you will have a life well lived with your neighbor and glorifying Him. So anyway, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, it says this: "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church?" That's a great question Paul presents. Verse 6, "He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil." May God bless the reading of His word, and everyone said, I want you to write these 4 words down: that God calls the qualified. God calls the qualified. Now, I'm going to expand on that throughout the text, and just wait till the very end, because it's going to make a lot more sense. Because you might say, well, none of us are qualified. Yes and no. And I'm going to answer that here in a little bit. But God calls the qualified. Leadership always matters, doesn't it? Many of you are in military and you hear leadership principles constantly. But leadership in every area of life, church, home, whatever job you're in, matters. But leadership in the church matters eternally. Every scandal, every church collapse, every wounded congregation reminds us of a simple truth: that the church rises and falls, humanly speaking, on the character of its leaders. That's another reason that I love Paul here. I love Paul in every other aspect, but that's one reason I like him here. He does not begin with a certain type of gifting for an elder, pastor, or overseer. He doesn't begin with charisma. He doesn't even begin with the pastor, elder must have a vision. He doesn't begin with that. He begins with character, because character matters. How many times do we see the biggest and brightest stars, the biggest communicators, the pastors of the largest churches, that they're doing so many things, and they've got all kinds of social media platforms, they got the podcast, they've got all the things, and then you turn on your phone one day and they have fallen into a trap. They fail. You hear about it all the time. We've seen this through the likes of many in the Bible as well, so it's nothing really new, namely Saul in the Old Testament. The people wanted a king. They begged God for a king. So what did God do? He handed them over to their ways, And so who did they choose? A man that was tall, dark, and handsome. That's what they chose. He had charisma. He was gifted in speaking. He had a vision for where he wanted to take the people. But did anybody question his character? Not really. Having a good leader in the church will help all of us live in the household of God appropriately. But before addressing worship, what type of worship the church should have, what kind of doctrine, mission, he addresses leadership. Now, all those other things I just mentioned matter, right? So don't get me wrong or take me or misunderstand or take me out of context there. Those things matter, but he addresses leadership in the church first. Because when leadership goes wrong, everything goes wrong. And it's important for us to know who the qualified people are to be in leadership in the local church. And this passage answers really one main question, which a lot of churches ask this question, especially when searching for a new pastor. When a church is searching for a new pastor, congregations will listen to sermons. You need to know if someone can preach well, if they're preaching correctly. But sometimes they look at it all wrong. And I would ask, well, what kind of preaching are you looking for? Are we looking for the type of preaching that excites people, right? And the type of preaching that gets a few laughs from time to time, right? When we walk out of the room and say, wow, that preaching was the best sermon that I've ever heard. The preaching might be good, but what about the man? So the question should be, what kind of man does God call to shepherd his church? What about the man? Look at verse 1 again. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a what? A noble task. The first phrase refers to what is being said that follows the phrase is good. So as to say, if you desire to be an overseer or an elder, the leader of the church or pastor, all those things will be synonymous with each other. What I'm saying is trustworthy. This is what has to happen. This is what has to happen in your life if there is a desire to do that, because it is a noble task. And there's a certain element that everyone should have a certain desire to achieve a lot of these things within the respective complementary roles. So a person who is an overseer of the church literally translate here as a person with engagement and oversight. Engagement and oversight of the souls that worship within the household of God, the souls that are in the local church. So as a pastor, elder, overseer, myself, I will be held accountable to you on your behalf, because what I teach you, what I preach to you, what I pray is true, what I think is true, what you will believe, I'm engaged in that. So there's an eternal accountability within me to teach rightly and correctly. So this is not a domineering fashion, though. I'm not walking around with my thumb pressed on anybody, or a pastor should not do that, but it's one who cares for the people. Some translations will interpret this word to mean bishop, but this suggests a really kind of a certain type of hierarchy that really isn't present in the text. Some would say, notably Roman Catholic Church and some Protestant churches here and there, that a bishop exercises authority over an elder. But that's not really possible, since the term can be translated interchangeably of elder, pastor, overseer. So it's explicitly speaking of the leadership in the local church. See, Paul begins by affirming desire. You desire to be a pastor, elder, overseer. That is a noble task. You should have a desire to do that. Again, wanting to serve as an overseer, elder, pastor is not sinful or selfish. I remember beginning my journey to be called to preaching ministry, vocational church ministry. I remember being in a seat like this, like you're sitting in, watching the pastor, listening to the pastor preach, and having desire to do that, even though in many ways it made zero sense to me. But I had a desire to do what he was doing. Even though I didn't really know what that meant, there was a certain desire that God had placed in my life that I wanted to do that, because it's a noble task. And sure, it's something that all men should have a desire for. Listen to this. Not necessarily for the title, but because you care for people. Remember, he calls it a task, not a title. I remember when I was in my doctoral program, and for some of you, I technically am doctor. Just a couple of weeks ago, I'm not just saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm a doctor." A couple of weeks ago, Brooke wrote something down on a piece of paper that said like Dr. Mitchell Johnson, and my boys they can read and they're like, "Teddy's not a doctor. What are you talking about?" Like, well, not really. But when I was in my doctoral program, I had a pastor friend of mine, and he said, "Hey, you know what? You're going to go through this, and you're going to get the DR period, and you're going to go to graduation, and they're going to present you as doctorate. Then you're going to go to your church, and nobody will care." And he was right. He was right, because it's about a task, not a title. It's about the people. It's not about status. It's about service. That's what it's all about. It's not privilege, though it is a privilege to be that, not to receive privilege. It's a responsibility. Because to be completely honest, being a pastor and elder is not sunshine and rainbows. It is not. It's a difficult work. It's a good work, but it is a difficult work. See, in many churches, people desire leadership for recognition, control, or a platform. Now, you know what's interesting, and I'll allude to this later. Many times, if you see anybody in a local church and they're that type of guy that they want all the control, they want the power, and anytime there's an issue in the church, you can always stem it back to that person. Anytime there's somebody like that in a local church, I'm not going to say 100% because I don't have the scientific data to prove this, but most of the time, they have no control over their own household. And so they find the one place they think they can have some sort of control in the local church. But see, Paul talks about having control over your household. So they're automatically disqualified for being an overseer or elder in the local church. So they're taking authority that really isn't theirs to have anyway. See, Paul here, he affirms desire, but only when it's shaped by willingness to sacrifice, shepherd, and suffer. See, many people that I just mentioned, the type of people that I just mentioned, they don't want to sacrifice. They don't want to truly shepherd. They don't want to truly suffer for the sake of the gospel and serving other people in the local church. They just want the platform. But Jesus himself said the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep in John chapter 10. It means that you give of yourself. Basically, you have nothing else to give. It's all service. Being an elder, a pastor, overseer is a noble task, but what type of man is actually qualified? The first thing that Paul addresses is that this man must be above reproach. Look at verses 2 and 3 again. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach. The husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. See, Paul gives a list here. It's not a checklist for perfection because no one's perfect. Because believe me, I've never met a perfect pastor, yours included in that. But it says there an overseer must be above reproach. And let me just say this, as your pastor, there will be times where I even fail you at times. I won't live up to your expectations. I won't. I may say something to you on an individual level that might be wrong. I might forget about a meeting that we had. I might not respond to the email in a timely manner. I'm imperfect. But just because there's imperfections there doesn't mean that we should avoid striving being above reproach. This is an umbrella qualification. There's several things that are underneath this. It doesn't mean that they have to be sinless because no one is sinless, but no obvious pattern of sin that discredits the gospel. They can't continue a life of sin, is what it's saying. Another way of saying this would be an external personal reputation that would be a credit to the church. Meaning, again, this person must add value to the church, not discredit, not take away value from the church, but add value to the church by adding value to individuals. Then Paul lists out some key character traits that this man should have. He first says that this man has to have a faithful personal life. Notice what he says, husband of one wife. Now, many have varying views on what this actually means. Some believe that you cannot be a pastor if you've ever gotten a divorce. And there are so many different ways that you can interpret this. I would say that I certainly have some people that have this certain type of conviction. And if they have that conviction, I would say, hey, if it goes against your conscience, yeah, absolutely, you should not become a pastor. Now, I also have a really good pastor friend that has been divorced twice and is married a third time, but he didn't come to know Christ until after his second divorce. And I would ask him, I asked him, knowing how he would respond, and I could ask because we were really good friends. I said, you being divorced twice, how can you counsel people to stay in their marriage when you yourself have had two divorces? He said, if anybody knows what not to do in a marriage, it's me. So I could counsel them in that way. But that's not necessarily what the text might be saying, is if you've ever gotten a divorce, you can't be a pastor. It doesn't explicitly say that. Some believe that you cannot be a practice polygamy, be a polygamist, which really is not biblical. So I don't think that Paul is alluding to this at all here. Some believe that the pastor or elder has to be married in order to carry out the task of a pastor or an elder. Though I do believe that marriage protects the pastor in many ways, we can't really say that this is what this text is saying because Jesus wasn't even married, yet he exercised authority as a pastor or elder. And there's a whole host of others that weren't necessarily married. What this does mean is that men are held to a higher standard when it comes to his home life. Men, you have to have your household in order. You have to lead your house well. What this likely alludes to is that a man desiring to be an elder, must be morally faithful, sexually pure, and devoted to the things of God. Leadership in the church begins with your faithfulness at home. Men, if you want your wife to love Jesus, you have to love Jesus. Men, if you want your children to love Jesus, you have to love Jesus. I don't have the statistic right in front of me, but it's astounding. If the man comes to know Christ, there's over a 90% chance that the rest of the family will follow. That has nothing to necessarily do with just the biblical principles or biblical facts. That's just the facts. That's what occurs. Paul also says that this man must have self-control and must be disciplined. He says that these men must be sober-minded, self-controlled, and respectable. Men, it is a time to be disciplined. You must be intentional with everything in your life. Men are the worst at making excuses for all their problems. Most of the problems can be alleviated, not all, by your intentional discipline in everything that you do in your life. Well, I don't have enough time to read my Bible. Wake up earlier. Well, I'm too tired when I wake up. Go to bed earlier. I don't have enough time to spend with my kids. Say no to everything else. If you say you enjoy your kids more than anything else, then get rid of everything else. Well, if I don't have much money, sell the boat. Be disciplined with everything and intentional with everything in your life. I keep falling into the pit of drugs and alcohol. Stop hanging out with the people that do drugs and drink alcohol. I keep stumbling with the person I'm dating. Stop dating them. If they're not there to hold you accountable, they're probably not going to do it when you're married. Be intentional with everything in your life. Pray before the meals. Be intentional with everything. I could go on a slew of a lot of things, but you have to be disciplined, man. I would say you need to be disciplined with your physical activity. Because if you want to play with your grandchildren, you've got to be physically active now. If you want to be disciplined with your money so that you can be generous to your church or your family later, you've got to be disciplined with your finances now. If you want to be disciplined with anything else in your life, you have to do it now. But he also says that these men must be hospitable. This isn't about personality. It's about their posture, right? I hear some people say, he's got a good personality. What defines a good personality? Everybody has a personality, so that every personality is good. Now, there might be some traits that might be disliked by some, but that's not necessarily the personality thing. A shepherd, though, opens his life to others. He's available to others. He then says that these men must be able to teach. This is one of the clear skilled qualifications that he presents here. But notice that Paul does not say that you have to be a certain way to preach. He doesn't say that you have to preach better than the next guy, because believe me, you can leave this building and you can go on YouTube or some other church website and hear somebody that preaches better than me. That's just a fact. I realize that. I know that. He doesn't say you have to be super charismatic. He doesn't say that you have to be fashionable and up with the times so that you can attract a certain generation. He doesn't say any of that. What he says is that this man must know sound doctrine. He must defend truth and teach Scripture clearly and faithfully. As long as you have a man that's doing that, you have a great teacher and a great pastor. Now, many men will read that and stop there and think, well, yeah, I could probably teach. I could probably do that. Maybe you know some things in the Bible. Maybe you love your family for the most part. But then Paul gets into some stuff that honestly gets a little bit more personal. It really kind of hits closer to home, so to speak. He says that these men must be gentle and not domineering. But first he says that this man cannot be a drunkard. Now, we could go all through the scriptures and look at whether or not you can drink alcohol or not. I've heard many great arguments saying that you can. I've heard many great arguments that say that it's permissible. Let me be clear that Paul's not addressing that right here, right now, in that manner. What he is saying is that you cannot be a drunkard. Now, many people are going to hear me say that and say, well, Mitch says I can drink because I'm good. No, I never said that. And I'm not saying that. In fact, I would say that if you have struggled with alcohol in your past, or currently struggle with it, or you allow it in your home, allowing other people to struggle with it, the best place for alcohol in your home is down the drain. If it was something that marked your sinful past, don't let it be a part of your life. Because being a drunkard always leads the other issues that Paul addresses here. Every single time. There's people in this church that struggle with alcohol so much. And I've seen the damage that it can do, not just to the individual and not just the family, but it can affect so many other things in the community. And my prayer for that, this is not in my notes, my prayer for that is that it would not be a hindrance in your life. You know, so many times people try to like go around the edges and permissible or not, and they forget about the other things. Because they say, the drinking's permissible. And again, I'm not here to say whether or not it is or not. I'm not here to say that. But we'll focus on, it's permissible to do this. And they forget about the other things that Paul addresses here. He says that you can't be violent. I would say that being a drunkard always leads to some sort of violence. It means, though, that you don't start fights just because you think you can win. No one really cares. A couple weeks ago, Atlas, we were sitting on my couch or in the living room, and we have Juliana, she's 10, 11 weeks old. And he said, if anybody says anything about her at church, I'm going to punch him in the throat. And so, okay, all right. And this just comes out of nowhere. I said, okay, well, if somebody says that, just come up to me and I'll talk to them, or, mommy will talk to them, but don't just go punching somebody in the throat. He said, well, If anybody hits me, I'm gonna hit them back. I'm like, well, where is this conversation coming from? It's like a typical bro mindset of like scoping the room, scanning the room to see who you can beat up and who you can't. I get it. Like bros do that from time to time, but actually the scripture says that we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't just be looking around to see who we can fight. A truly strong man will dampen violence, not provoke it, right? We'll try to simmer it down. Like, no, there's no need to fight. There's nothing to prove here. And he actually says that men need to be gentle. Now, what this does not mean is that you now have to put lotion on constantly, wear skinny jeans, and you can't watch football or UFC, nor can you ever defend yourself. That's not what he's saying. It's how you respond to people when they do act out of violence to you. When someone makes a passive-aggressive remark to you or downright rude, you respond with gentleness. This is what he's saying. I would say that some of the most God-fearing moments I had when I was disciplined wasn't when my father yelled at me, though I probably deserved it a lot more. It was the moments that he spoke quietly to me. And he has that certain look, and you feel like you just want to melt. Responding in a gentle manner has the same effect to someone who wants to be violent to you, especially when they're not honoring the Lord. You'll look different. And if they are a believer and you respond gently, they will feel deeply convicted. Theodore Roosevelt, some of you know the quote, speak softly, what? Carry a big stick. Now, I know that refers to being ready for war. I realize that. But church, we have a bigger stick than machines for war. We have the Lord God on the throne to take care of the people who want to be violent against us. Let God deal with those people. There's no need for us to do that. He does a better job at it. Because of that, we can avoid quarrels. As he says that men should not be quarrelsome. This is something that continues to come up. So you know it's incredibly important to Paul. He also says that these men cannot be lovers of money. Again, church, this is one reason I don't touch money. And if you do not know this, if you ever come up to me handing me money, I won't touch it. I don't like to touch it. Now, if it is a gift to me, you're saying, I want to give this money to you to use however you see fit for you and your family, I will gladly receive it. I will touch that money. But if it is not for me, it's for the church or for somebody else, I don't touch it because I do not want the temptation to be a lover of money. And I also don't want to be misunderstood. There's a whole host of other things. 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. Money can lead you to do some evil things. So I would say, avoid it. Avoid it. Avoid it. Now, money drives life. I understand that. You have to pay bills. You have to buy groceries. You have to do all those things. And I would even say to the men, if you spend more money on your toys than you do your kids, you are a lover of money more than your children. There's nothing wrong with the toys and all the things. There's nothing wrong with that. But as long as your family's being taken care of first, they have the priority over all of your things. All these issues disqualifies bully leadership, angry leadership, and greedy leadership. Then he says that the shepherd must be gentle, patient, and humble. You see this in verses 4 and 5. It says this, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? Paul's logic is simple and unavoidable. Again, he says, if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? The answer is real simple. He will not and cannot. He will not and he cannot. This also does not mean that pastors and elders will have perfect children or even a perfect wife. It means that they will have faithful leadership, loving authority, and a consistent example. In other words, you will be the same type of man at home that you are here. Now, if my walls could speak in my own home, also my wife and my children, they would be able to tell you that I am not perfect. There are times in the middle of the church that I snap. I say things that I shouldn't. I might raise my voice a little bit too high at the wrong moment or for sinful gain. I might be real quick to anger at times. I was saying the scripture says that should be slow to anger and quick to listen and to analyze the situation, but I am imperfect. I sometimes do those things. But he's not saying that you have to be perfect. Is simply saying that a man who neglects his home to lead the church is not qualified to lead the church. A man who cannot lead his home is not mature enough to lead in any capacity at the church. Which Paul addresses spiritual maturity here in verse 6. It says this, he must not be a recent convert or maybe become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Notice again, he says he must not be a recent convert. So is Paul saying that people who are new believers cannot be pastors or elders? Yes, that's what he is saying. But why? Because pride destroys leaders before other sinful action does. Now, new believers, may be passionate and gifted. You remember when you first became a believer, you were so passionate and so on fire. I remember I was so passionate. I could preach the gospel to a doorknob, and it would turn and be saved. I just felt like it could. I wanted everybody to come to know Christ. I've shared this before. It was like a couple weeks after I came to know Christ. I read I don't know how many books on how to share the gospel with other faiths and other people. I had this book on how to share the gospel with Jehovah's Witness, and it was like a 300-page book. And I thought every Jehovah's Witness is going to come to know Christ because of me. I had this faith. And I was driving behind this Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall one day, and they were getting ready to have their meeting, their church service, I guess you could call it. And they were all hanging out in the parking lot. And I was like, you know what? They bother me on a Saturday morning, so I'm going to bother them before church. So I ride up there and park in one of their parking spots. And I go out there and say, hey, y'all need to know true Jesus. And I didn't really know what to say. And then I had a bunch of people come out there trying to share their faith with me. And I was like, y'all are wrong. I'm right. John chapter 1, Jesus is God. And I'm preaching the gospel. And I don't really know what I'm saying. But I had one guy said, hey, we appreciate your zeal, but you've got to go. I said, I'm not going until somebody knows Christ. He said, we're calling the cops. I'm like, I'm leaving. I was so passionate about people coming to know Christ. But sometimes, you see right there, I wasn't mature enough in my faith to actually know what I was doing. I just had passion and no maturity at all. So God was protecting me, the man. He protects the men in the church who come to know Christ in their faith, and he protects the church. As I can look back on my calling to ministry, and I can without a shadow of a doubt say that I was not ready to enter full-time vocational local church ministry right when I was called into ministry. For several reasons. First, I truly didn't know much about the scriptures. I wasn't raised in a Christian home, so I didn't know anything about the scriptures hardly. If someone said, hey, they're talking about Martin Luther, I thought they were talking about Martin Luther King. I had no idea about the church reformer. It was talk about the book of Genesis. I had no idea. It could have been the last book of the Bible to me. I didn't know. All I know, that's kind of a joke if you know about it. It's the beginning. It's not the end, right? I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything about the scriptures. Second, and I think really most importantly, I wasn't mature enough to deal with people. I don't know how to deal with people. In ministry, as a pastor elder, you have to know how to do both. If ministry was just preaching a sermon, I think a lot more people would do it, if this is all that it was. But you have to build capital and a good reputation with people. And I'll tell you this, any pastor, and I see Janie back there. She knows a lot of pastors. She's spoken to a lot of pastors. One of the most difficult things about being a pastor is the transition from preaching a sermon to the transition to talking with people after the sermon. You ever heard that, Janie? That's one of the most difficult things about ministry. It's because preaching on this kind of context right here, then you just got to change. I can't explain it. I don't know how to do it. Because many, even new converts, they'll preach a sermon and they'll go back in the back to shake everybody's hands and they'll expect a bunch of compliments. Oh man, great sermon, great sermon, great sermon. You might hear a lot, but then you hear somebody say that was a terrible sermon. And that's the only thing they'll hear. And they got to know how to deal with that. They got to know how to deal with people who bring all their stuff. Many times, anytime I counsel people or pastor elder counsel somebody, you're meeting somebody at their worst, not their best. So they're bringing all their baggage. And then when you leave that meeting, you go to another meeting with somebody else with that. And then you've got to go home and run your household. And then when your wife asks you, how was your day? It was good. You want to talk about it? No? Why not? You don't need to know. And you got to carry that. And just so you know, my wife, just so y'all know this, my wife, there's an assumption with pastors' wives that they know everything. And some people will tell me something, they'll think that my wife automatically knows, and this hasn't happened recently, but I don't tell her everything, just so you know, because I don't want her to think of somebody else negatively or come up with something in her mind, and I don't want y'all thinking something about her because she doesn't really know. I don't unload everything on her, all the knowledge that I have, because I want to protect the person who told me. I want to have integrity there. Now, I also want to protect her too. I believe that's my responsibility, not just as a pastor, but as her husband. And if I were to enter ministry right when I was called, I would not have a good reputation with people because of my bad reputation that I just left. I remember when I came to know Christ in my local church, it was kind of like, oh, you're a Christian now? Wow. Interesting. Interesting. And then I announced my call to ministry. They're like, even more interesting. I know a lot of your life. If anybody were to say, aren't you ashamed of all the things that you did before Christ and now you're preaching the gospel? Yes, I'm ashamed of all the things I did before preaching the gospel, but because of Christ transform me, now that I can preach Christ, I'm not preaching myself, I'm preaching Jesus. And what he did for me, he can do for you. No one would have taken me seriously when I first went into ministry. Not that I had to prove myself, but I had to build trust to convince people that I was actually trustworthy of the calling that God had placed in my life, which leads to the last verse in verse 7. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. Short of the long here, a good reputation with outsiders matters. Our concern should not be whether or not people like us or not, because we shouldn't have a fear of man. We should have a fear of God. When we fear man, we make an idol of ourselves because we think too much of ourselves and not enough about God. But the church must have a good reputation with this community. One thing I heard all the time when I first got here a little over 2 years ago is that this community does not care for this church. It's not their job to care about this church. It's the church's job to care about them. Paul cares deeply about the church's witness. We should care about what the local community thinks about us. I want to be known more for what we're about than what we're against. Now, we are against some things, undoubtedly, without question. But what we are for is loving people that live across the street. And what we are for is helping the local school. What we are for is those people out there. We want to see them transformed for the glory of God. This doesn't mean an overseer must be admired by the world, because trust me, I'm not admired by the world. Nor if you desire to be an elder or a pastor, you're not going to be admired by the world. You know, I meet pastors who are pastors of these big, huge churches. Then they go into town and nobody knows them. Not going to be admired by the world, but he must be credible. No pattern of dishonesty, no pattern of abuse or a scandal. Because listen, the gospel is already offensive. There's no need for us to go and mess it up even more. Our lives should not add unnecessary offense. So here's the way to the passage. No pastor or elder perfectly meets these qualifications. Now, if you remember, the main idea, I had you write the 4 words down. God calls the qualified. Our qualification is not based on what we do, but who Christ is. That's why Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, work out your own salvation. That doesn't mean you have a works-based salvation. It means that we continue to become better believers than we were before. Our qualification is based on what Christ has done in us and what he continues to do in us. So I would say at the end of the day, am I qualified? Not based on my own qualifications, but by who Christ is and what he has done in me. Now you notice all those things I got to do to be an elder. You cannot do it without the work of Christ. And no person can do anything outside the work of Christ. Every faithful pastor points beyond himself to Jesus. He should be our reflection and who we desire to be like. Because Jesus was above reproach. He's perfectly obedient, gentle and humble, faithful over God's household, laid his life down for the sheep. Pastors and elders do not save the church. Christ does. Elders simply shepherd in his name. This passage calls us to an ongoing self-examination and not self-promotion. The question is not, am I gifted enough? Am I good enough? Are people going to like me? If anyone in this room desires, man, if you want the platform to be an elder because you think as a pastor you get all the compliments, you get all the attaboys, pats on the back, and all those types of things, it's far from it. I remember entering ministry and having almost like a shell-shock moment of realizing, wow, this is not what I thought it was. I thought I would go in and teach. People would ask me about theology and all this kind of stuff, and no, someone just wanted to tell me about how their kittens need to be declawed and I need to pray for them. Crazy stuff, but also really weighty stuff too. Marriage is on the brink of divorce. People losing a newborn baby the day after birth. Preaching a sermon that maybe not everybody likes, but everyone needs to hear. Not an easy task. The real question should be, am I godly enough to do this? Am I growing in my faith in Christ to do this? For the church as a whole, this teaches us what to value in leaders. Not charisma over character, not success over faithfulness, not popularity over holiness. So I would say this, church, would you pray for your pastors? Are you praying for your pastors? I mean, can I just desperately make a plea with you? I need it so badly. So badly. I need it. You know, I was with Brooke. Can I be honest and transparent and vulnerable with you for a minute? Can I just do that? Every pastor I know goes through a season like this. And I was sitting there. I sat with Jane just a couple days ago and sat with Brooke the other day. And we wake up early in the morning. And I was just sitting there and just saying, the last couple weeks, I just asked myself this question, what am I doing? You ever get in that, just in your own life, you ever get in that position, what am I doing? What do I have to show for it? What am I doing? And Brooke real quickly reminds me, well, look at this. You got to look at the good. Don't look at what you don't have or what you might lose. You got to look at what you have. I was like, wow, profound. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Brooke. What am I doing? Would you pray for your pastors? Because there's so many pastors today, this day, on a Sunday, that are going to resign at their church for a wide variety of reasons. And they're never going to return to ministry ever again. Ever. I'm not doing that, just so you know. Would you pray for them that they would know how to lead their church well? Maybe not do everything that you may like them to do, or, because I know I'm going to do that too. Would you pray that they would make wise decisions? Also, pray that they would lead their families well. I know a lot of pastors and pastors' wives who deter a pastor's ministry because of gossip and slander. Pray for pastors' wives as well. They need it. And so they're held in high regard. I think you held Brooke in high regard, and so I appreciate that. Some of you may have heard everything I just talked about, and you heard all the qualifications, and maybe Christ has not done a work in your life yet. Maybe you've not come to know Christ. Maybe that today is today. I'm going to go ahead and ask Taylor to come up. He's going to close us in a song. We want you to respond. Maybe some of you, there might be a stirring that you might want to be a pastor elder one day. I don't know. Maybe you want to answer that call, or maybe just enter into that season of that. You may not know what that looks like. It might be really scary, but maybe you want to enter into that. I remember when I answered my call, I had really no idea what that looked like. And I thought, man, am I going to go around healing babies every day and, sprinkling water on everybody? I didn't know what that was like, but I can tell you it's been a wild ride, but it's been a great ride.